Welcome to another episode of the Live Ready podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing the knowledge that you need to feel ready for the different challenges in life, the ones that you're expecting and the ones that you're sometimes not expecting. My name is Patrick Charon. I am your host, and my guest today is Max Powers. So what can I say about Max Powers? First of all, he's a very good friend of mine. I consider him to be a brother. He is a fitness professional. He's a movement specialist. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a professor of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And in this conversation, we talk a lot about self-defense training. That is something that has become extremely important to me about sharing what I know about self-defense. And because of his background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he has a different perspective on self-defense, some different knowledge about self-defense, but the reason we come together so often is because our knowledge really overlaps. My coming from a striking background, him coming from the jiu-jitsu background, we've really been able to create this kind of complete system when it comes to self-defense training, which is something we're really excited about and we'll be talking about in this episode. We're also going to talk about the importance of functional training and functional fitness, what that means and what we really need to be focusing on if we want to have a functional approach to fitness. We also talk about our shared belief in the power of breath training. So there's a lot of really great content in this conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Max Powers. Okay, Max. So before we get started, there's a new tradition that I'm starting with this podcast, which is I invite my guest to take one long, deep breath with me so that we can connect physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. And so if anyone's listening, I would invite them to join us, and I think they'll just get a really nice connection to the conversation we're about to have. So I'd invite you and everyone else to just take a moment to close their eyes. Take a long, deep breath in through the nose. Hold that breath for 3, 2, 1, and slowly release it through the nose. And I swear every time I do that, I'm amazed at how one single breath can have such a powerful effect on the mind, on the body, and get us into focus. Max Powers, my brother, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have this conversation. We've had a few of these conversations in the past, but I felt like with everything that's going on in the world, we've all gone through a pandemic. We've gone through so much. And I feel like this Live Ready podcast is all about helping people feel ready for the unexpected, helping with the challenges in life, whether they're physical challenges, mental challenges, emotional challenges, dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety. But also, I think from the physical perspective, understanding that we don't want bad things to happen, but bad things do happen. And they happen unexpectedly, whether it's with our health, whether it's a self-defense situation, whether it's an accident. And as someone who I know to be, I think you have a really great understanding of not just the human body and the way that it moves and what it's capable of, but you're also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, which I think gives you a very unique perspective on these concepts of self-defense and functional training. So I wanted to have you on so that we can dive into some of those things and hopefully inspire and motivate people to start taking that part of their lives a little more seriously. And to seek out some of that knowledge, because I don't think you need a lot of it, but I think you need some of it to feel ready for those different types of challenges. I think the last thing I'd say before I let you talk is, even if you're someone who's strong, even if you're someone who is capable of defending themselves, I think we also have a responsibility, especially when we look at the racial violence that seems to be increasing in our society, or any type of violence or any type of negativity that might be happening. I think that we need to start taking responsibility for each other as a community and stepping up for each other. So even if I feel safe, well, am I in a position to help someone else feel safe? Am I in a position to step in if someone else needs my help? So let's dive in. First of all, maybe let people know a little bit more about what you're up to these days. I know that you're training people. I know that you're back at teaching jiu-jitsu, which I'm sure you're very excited about. So let's start there, and then we'll see where this conversation goes.
Well, yeah, movement or training and physical fitness has been an integral part of my life for at least 10 years, if not my whole life. because I've always been an active person. And around the same time I became a personal trainer, I also started my own journey in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm now a black belt and also like a Jiu-Jitsu professor. And it's just a real deep love of mine to join not only movement, but also like kind of safety or stress management, like we've talked a bit before. Uh, really putting to great use your physical capacity and then mix and match it with stress management in the sense that now when I practice jujitsu, I'm not only training my body, but I'm also training techniques that will help me not only stay myself safe, but also maybe permit me to intervene if I see some sort of social injustice, right? And give me the emotional strength because I've practiced it against other practitioners, other people that are sometimes bigger than me or faster than me, and and it puts me in a situation where I practice what I know about self defense on a daily or weekly basis. So now, if something which fortunately has never really happened in my life, but if it happens in the future, I'll be able to intervene and keep the peace because that's the main idea of martial arts is to be able to use our martial skills or skills of warriorship to maintain peace. That's how I see it, at
Yeah,
least.
and it's amazing you just said that because I recently spoke to someone and I was telling them how I believe martial arts is kind of like the anti-violence in the sense that, and what you just said makes so much sense, which is every day you train violence. Every day you learn how to manage that energy. Because I think we all have violent energy. You know, for some people it turns into actual violence. For other people it becomes stress or anxiety issues. For other people it's depression. Um, but we all have that negative, violent energy. And if we don't find ways to deal with it, manage it, express it, it goes into a negative direction. But every day, what you're doing is you're finding a positive way to use that energy and express it and learn to build a relationship with it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think we, so many people have these misunderstandings about what martial arts is. And I was telling someone the other day also, like, the most peaceful people I've met is through martial arts training. Like these masters who've been practicing for 30, 40, 50 years, these are the most peaceful people you will ever meet because they have no need for violence. They have such an understanding of their bodies and their minds and that energy that they get to such a peaceful place. So, talk a little bit about that. Like what was it like in the beginning when you first started jiu-jitsu? Because I know that you came in as this like tough, strong football, I've got all these big muscles. What are these, weak little jujitsu guys going to do to me? And you got schooled hard, right? Like they showed you really quick,
Cool.
so quickly that it doesn't matter how
Yeah,
big you are, how strong you are. If you don't know, you're in
yeah,
trouble. But as your journey
yeah.
continued, I know that it also helped you to develop a sense of peace and a sense of connection. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, definitely, like in all honesty, I was somewhat a bit of a cocky guy before, coming from the football background, playing at a university level, being bigger than I am now. I'm already 200 pounds, but I was bigger. I was like, yo, nobody can beat me. I'm the best, blah, blah, blah. And just like you said, I found some small little jujitsu guy. I think the first time I came to class, that the teacher was 145 pounds. And back then I was 215, maybe a bit more. So my mom was like, "Yeah, that's the teacher. Like, I'm gonna take care of him easily." And then I had the chance to go with him twice. Like the first time, I was like, "Oh, he's lucky. He choked me. He tapped me with an armbar or whatever." And then the second time, okay, I'm gonna be serious, and it was the same scenario or worse, right? Because I didn't know anything about jujitsu or martial arts or technique, and he did, and he schooled me just like you said. And also, when I have this little story that I often say when people ask me why did I get hooked on jujitsu? Like I said before, movement, fitness, training is me. It's not even something I do. It's who I am. And so the first few times I went to class and I fought this 145 teacher, 145-pound teacher, it mesmerized me how he's definitely weaker than me. How is he taking control of my body? It's my body. I'm not even able to get up or whatever. So it would happen so often back then that I would go back home taking a bus or public transportation, and I'd be so in my mind, like trying to figure out what's going on. I'd miss my bus stop, like at least, at least four, five, six, 10 times. I would just go past my house because I was in my head like, what did he do at that moment? It was really, it was really something that took a lot of space in my mind, and I got hooked from that day until it's been 10 years now.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happened to me with Muay Thai, where I would find myself like lying in bed practicing combinations in my mind, or like there's this combination of body and mind that you get in martial arts that I don't know exists in many
Mm-hmm.
other things. Um, Personally, I think rock climbing is the one thing that kind of touched on that a bit. I didn't do much of it, but it's that problem solving, right? Because it's and
Mm-hmm.
I think Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu have very different energies, but at the end of the day, it's problem solving. You're faced with this chess match of technique versus technique, strength versus strength, weakness versus weakness, and you have to figure out what that other person doesn't know and use that against them in the
Yeah,
hope that what you
definitely.
know is able to beat what they know. And like you said, I mean, in some cases, of course, size and strength does matter to a certain extent, especially like in a striking art where, you know, if a guy's twice my size, well, he's going to hit twice as hard if he has good technique. But I've also faced off against guys twice my size and had no problem at all because they didn't know anything. You know, and I hit pretty hard for a small guy. So it's but again,
Mm-hmm.
there is a part where size does matter. But that said, I think especially with jiu-jitsu, because of the way that, you know, you're not allowed to hit and you have to respect certain rules, um, it really is more about the one who knows more is going to have the advantage versus the one who has the bigger muscles, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's it. I think it's that chess match, that combination of mind and body where, like you said, you're going home, you're taking the bus home from class and you miss your stop because you're so into what just happened. How do I get better? And that's what I'm sure made you go back, right? Was that desire to
Yes,
know
100%.
more. Like you got triggered and now you're like, okay, if this guy can do this to me, I need to know why and I need to learn more. So what was that journey like? Like when did you feel like you went from forgetting strength and really focusing on technique? And when do you feel like you finally started to get to a point where you're like, oh, wait, I think I'm actually catching on to this thing?
Hmm. Well, just so people know, Jiu-Jitsu has five belts. So you have the white belt, which is the beginner belt, then you have blue belt, purple belt, brown, and then finally black. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was around purple belt, so it's right in the middle of the journey, if you want. Uh, just being who I am, I was listening to what's it called again? The Dao De Jing. It's the it's like the Bible of Taoism, if you want.
Yes.
It's one of the main books in some Eastern philosophy schooling or whatever. And they would, I'm pretty sure everybody has an idea of who Bruce Lee is. And Bruce Lee has this saying where he says, be water. And I would have this saying while fighting as a purple belt, to be water and be soft and be flexible and be agile and stuff like that. And also correlate with the fact that jujitsu in Japanese means the gentle art. So I don't know how or when exactly it clicked, but it was definitely around my when I had my purple belt that it's not so much about trying to overpower people with my athletic abilities or my physical strength, but it's more about tricking them to some way or strategize around my mental abilities. A little bit like, just like you said, I have to try and figure out what my opponent doesn't know and try to capitalize on that, hoping that what I know is enough to neutralize or defeat my opponent. And that happened around midway through my jujitsu journey. And I really felt that now my whole fighting style was about energy efficiency more than okay, I need to win or I need to push harder. It's more about could I be able to fight longer? Could I be able if I miss an arm? Could I be able to fight if I'm blindfolded? Like it was more about how could I stay in the fight no matter what, you know, and stay safe. That's the central piece of I guess martial art is safety, right?
Yeah, and I love that you said that because I wanted to segue this conversation into self defense. My goal here isn't to just talk about jujitsu for an hour. It's really more to talk about the principles around jujitsu and self defense training. And I think there's a lot of very nice parallels. And I think what I love about jujitsu from a self defense perspective is one size is less important, meaning even a small woman who knows jiu-jitsu could have an advantage over a larger man who doesn't know jiu-jitsu. So if she found herself in a self-defense situation, she could be safe because of it. And I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it in gyms where I remember the wife of our jiu-jitsu coach at the first academy I was at, she was a black belt, and she was maybe 110 pounds, 115 pounds, and she would roll with guys all the time and make them look completely ridiculous. And it was really funny because a lot of the men would be like, what? I can't roll with her. Like, I'm going to hurt her. And everyone would laugh like, yeah, good luck, buddy. Good luck. And she knew her strengths. She didn't play a strength game. She knew she wasn't going to outstrength them, but she would climb up. She would turn them. It was amazing to watch. And for me, I think it was because in striking, size again matters, meaning, a 110-pound woman fighting a 200-pound man, she's at risk. She's at a much higher risk if it's a striking art because of the size difference. As we're in jiu-jitsu, it's a very different situation. And that really opened my mind to the possibilities, especially when it comes to self-defense. So I'd like to know if you agree with this. As I build, because Live Ready is really about helping people feel ready for the unpredictable situations that can happen in life. One of those being the potential, especially for women, of being assaulted, being attacked. Do you believe that I'm in the school of thought that you can learn 3 or 4 really solid jiu-jitsu techniques and be able to go out into the world feeling like you're ready for most bad situations that could happen in that type of situation? Does that make sense to you? Because that's my feeling of it, is that I don't know, like if I went up against a blue belt, I'd probably get schooled in a competitive jiu-jitsu situation. But put me in a self-defense situation where I'm allowed to use everything I know about striking, and I have 3 or 4 jiu-jitsu concepts or movement flows that I'm really comfortable with. And if I'm faced with someone who doesn't know any of this, it's going to be pretty easy for me to manipulate that person because they don't understand what I understand. And so I'd like to know if you agree with that yes, I think if you love jiu-jitsu and you want to get into training and practicing, that's amazing. But I also think that if you were to isolate 3 or 4 really solid techniques that could help with some of the self-defense situations you could find yourself in, that can also be really practical and really powerful. Is that something you agree with?
I 100% agree. The only thing I would maybe put emphasis on is, instead of maybe saying techniques, I would say principles, in a sense that at least once you get to like a higher level of jiu-jitsu, which I believe I am, it's not about techniques. It's about principle. It's about like situational awareness. It's not like it's not only about a specific technique where you grab this arm, then you put your arm on. It's more about understanding what's going on. Like, like if you're talking about takedowns, you have to understand where's the center of gravity of your opponent. Once you get that, it doesn't really matter the technique, It's just how do you shift that center of gravity. But definitely, if people are not necessarily into fitness, not necessarily into martial art, but they want to stay safe or they want to have self-defense knowledge, definitely with 3, 4, maybe 5 jiu-jitsu principles, I wish people would feel comfortable walking just about anywhere, because they have those principles and they understand them. I think that's the greatest gift that jiu-jitsu could give, or any martial art, is permit someone to walk down the streets, not in the posture of like the prey, and just the posture of a human, not even the predator, which is the opposite of the prey, but just walking like I'm handling my business, I'm doing my thing. I don't have to shrink my energy to go out in the
Yeah, that's
world.
beautifully said, because I think for me, that's a lot of what happened as I got more comfortable with Muay Thai and started to feel like, hey, wait a minute, I actually know what I'm doing here. There's a confidence that comes with that, and it's incredibly empowering and it's not like you're walking around the street looking for trouble. It's actually the opposite. It's more that I can walk around, and if trouble happens, well, I actually know what to do. And a lot of the women that I've trained, and I come back to women because obviously I think they're more at risk of finding themselves in these situations. Women that I've trained have told me the same thing, is the fact that I know that when I hit a pad with an elbow, I feel that power. I feel what I'm capable of producing, an energy that I'm producing with my own body. And that's incredibly empowering for them to know that they're capable of doing that. And obviously, it's like, I hope they never actually have to use these techniques. But the fact that they know how, and the fact that they have felt it and they've experienced it, gives them a sense of confidence that probably makes them less attractive to the predator, right? Like, and that's something,
Yeah.
and that's something that I've explored quite a bit just through reading about self-defense principles. And that is that when you have that confidence, you are less attractive to the person who's out looking for the prey, looking for that person to take advantage of. And I really believe that it's an energy thing. I think that once you achieve that level of confidence, of physical confidence, combined with mental confidence, you emit a different frequency of energy. Your energy is way less attractive to that person who's looking for someone to take advantage of. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well, where you're sparring with someone and their confidence level is so high, without even starting, you're already kind of intimidated, right? Where it's like, what do they know? Because I can feel something coming off them that I need to be on my game right now. Has this ever happened? I'm sure like some of your professors or whatever, you've like talk about that a little bit, because I think it's such an important part of this whole conversation, is this idea of energy and the confidence that comes with experience. So maybe talk on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely to come back to the belts, like that's kind of how you judge people on the mats, right? On the Jiu-Jitsu Academy is like, depending on what their belt, you have an idea of what they know. And there's definitely not only what they know, but they emit some sort of energy, like you're talking about. Like when you being a black belt, when I go to blue or a white belt, I see them, I feel them like, oh shit, like I'm going against a black belt guy, and like you feel their shoulders, you feel their whole body language is like either they're super on edge, like overly ready, or they're like kind of shy, almost backing up, even if the whole idea is to engage and fight. But then when you fight with like my own professor or any other black belts, the energy is much more different. And as you progress, it's much more about the mind, in a sense that my jujitsu professor is weaker than me physically. I bench more than him. I squat more than him, for sure. But he knows way more. So that when we engage, there's a calm, talking about the energy, and it's much more of a chess match. It's much more, okay, Max, I'm playing around with you. I'm grabbing your right hand. I'm grabbing your right hand hard so that you feel your right hand is threatened. And then I jump on your left leg. And you're like, oh, and then you're like all messed up, and eventually checkmate, because I haven't beat my master yet.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But definitely,
and I think
energy, and you feel
I felt the same way. And I think there's also this level of confidence where, I mean, I think jiu-jitsu may be a little less just because the risk of injury, it's a different style of training. But in Muay Thai, I always tell people, like, if I didn't compete very much, but I did spar a lot, like hours and hours and hours and hundreds and if not thousands of hours of sparring. And I've sparred with, everywhere from my beginner student who's never stepped in a ring all the way up to professional MMA fighters. And whenever there was someone new, it was the one that scared me the most was the one who didn't seem to give a shit about the fact that I was about to spar. Like those guys, they look right through you. There's this sense of like, I have no fear of you whatsoever. And that is the most intimidating thing. It's not the guy who's like, guy who's like growling and pumping himself up. And you see it in pro fighting as well, where the ones who do that, it's because they're hiding a fact that they're not confident, right? There's this need to build yourself up. But the ones that are really masterful, the ones like they're laughing, they're joking, they're having fun. It's just a game. Like it's super chill. And all of a sudden they're just destroying you. And there's a couple of guys like that I faced off with where I understood that I want to get to that level. I want to get to a level where I'm stepping into a ring. Doesn't really matter who's in front of me. I just know that, look, I'm going to bring the best version of me. That guy might be better than me, but I'm not going to be intimidated by what that person knows. I'm just going to be confident in what I know, because at the end of the day, that's all I can do. And I think if we bring it back to self-defense again, that's this combination. So, and this is something I know we both agree on, I think there's three important principles when it comes to self-defense. The first being martial arts training and having an understanding of using your body in that martial way should you need to defend yourself. But two is that self-defense isn't just about being attacked. It could also be I get into an accident. It could be I'm dealing with a crowd of people that are suddenly charging because of something that's happening in my community. It could be I'm in this weird terrain all of a sudden because I am in a natural disaster of some kind, or I'm in a car accident, or whatever it is, where suddenly it's not as much about martial arts and it's more about functional fitness and functional movement and my body's ability to react physically to all of these different situations. And then finally, and I think this is the most important one, is your ability to manage the stress of that situation. And that's where it comes back to the breath. That's where it comes back to the mind. And I think in fighting, you see it all the time. I've seen very talented fighters fail in competition because of their inability to manage stress. And I've seen fighters with a little less talent, but were so calm under pressure that they did extremely well. And you talked about that in the beginning, about how jiu-jitsu has helped you build a relationship with stress, because you're putting yourself in these stressful situations all the time. And so if life throws stress at you, you already trained yourself in a way to deal with it. But let's take it a step further, because you're also a trainer. You're also someone who works a lot to help people feel healthy and to help people move better. So what are the most important principles? Let's leave jiu-jitsu and martial arts to the side for a sec and talk about the movement principles. And what are the ways that you believe people can find that balance in their abilities to move to help them feel ready for all of the different challenges that life can throw at us physically?
Well, a little bit like the martial art example you just gave, there's like three concepts that I think are vital. And the first one is mobility, and I'm not talking about strength at all, but of all the joints in your body, do you have kind of full access to them? Are you able to rotate your wrist fully with no pain? Are you able to raise your arm without compensating in the spine? Are you able to open, rotate, extend, flex any type of joints in your body, A, with no pain, and then B, with proper range of motion? And also mobility, in opposition to flexibility, is do you have control in that range, right? Because some people, I'm going to take the yoga world or as an example, some people in the yoga world, they're like super flexible, to my eyes sometimes overly flexible, but no real control, in a sense that if you're like, some sort of ballerina that could lift your leg all the way up and control it back down, that's pure mobility. But if you have to hold your leg all the way up and you can't get your leg that high without the help of your hand, that's just flexibility. And there's a part of the range where you are able to lift the leg on your own and then you need to use your hand to go higher. That range is danger zone. That range is injury zone. If you get your leg in that area or whichever other part of your body with no control, that's where you get hurt. That's where you have no control. So after mobility, it is functional strength. And I really want to say functional strength in the sense that I'm not talking about lifting a car or deadlifting 500 pounds. Depending on your daily activities, are you able to express enough strength or control, because strength and control are similar, to do the job, And let's say I'm the people that pick up the trash. I have to be able to pick up 20 pounds, 30 pounds multiple times because that's my job. If I work standing up as a waiter or something, I need to have postural strength in my core or else I'm going to have back pain. So mobility, functional strength, and then work capacity. Do I have enough endurance? Am I able to metabolize energy to my body to sustain my day or my activities? And obviously, you could run marathons to increase your work capacity, but that's just your cardio. You have also like stamina, muscular stamina. Are you able to, I don't have an example of the job, but let's say you're a kindergarten teacher, okay? And you have to squat down to play with the kids 1,500 times in the day. Do you have that work capacity? And I'm not talking, are you able to squat a lot of pounds on your weight? Are you able to go up and down, up and down, up and down to help each and every kid in your class? So mobility as in opposition to flexibility, let's make the difference. Functional strength, am I able to pick up or express strength according to my daily activities? And in work capacity, can I do these movements of my daily activities enough? And actually, let's say I have to be a kindergarten and I have to squat 30 times in my training or in my actual capacity, I should be able to squat 35 times. Because if I have a bigger day, then I could do 35 squats in that day and I don't get hurt on 31st, 32nd, 33rd rep, you know? So when we're in the gym and we're talking about physical fitness, especially if you want to try to get hashtag functional training, that's hashtag functional training. What's your job? What do you need, the type of the movement you need to do? It's not how funky or how many likes you get on that videos. Does it correlate to your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I'm going to push back a little on what you said. And I think there's also balance of movement that's important. And what I mean by that is, let's take the example of you talked about the garbage guy, right? The guy who's picking up garbage, throwing him in the truck. And those guys work hard. I had a friend who did it in a summer when he was 19, and he's like, oh my God, I have no idea how hard this work is, especially in the summer, especially with the smell. And anyway, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is if you look at anyone who has that physical type of job and they do that job over a career, right? Let's say 20, 30 years, there's going to come a point where they've done that one particular movement set so many times that their body can do it with effortlessly. The problem being that they've neglected the other opposite movement sets, right? And that's where these injuries start to happen because of a lack of balance in their ability to move. I'll take my example, which was Muay Thai, which is very push, right? Every punch, even all the workouts, it was always push-ups and squats, and we never pulled. And I remember I started having a lot of back pain and a lot of issues with my neck, and I went to see an amazing sports therapist, and he said, it's unbelievable how much stronger you are there's a complete lack of balance between your front and back muscles because you push so much, but you never pull. So he's the first one who really opened me up to this idea that, for every reaction, for every action, there's a reaction, which is, and this happens all the time in sports where athletes who do a specific type of sport become very, very good at that sport, but they're also going to kind of have issues later on in their lives because their bodies, not just the wear and tear of the sport, but there's all of the movement patterns that you never explored. And the body wants to always find a way back into balance. And if you don't give it that opportunity, well, then you're starting to deal with these kind of long-term chronic type of injuries that are really, really difficult to deal with. And so what are ways, in your opinion, that people can start understanding that and kind of working to find balance and to find this holistic way of moving their bodies so that no matter what job they end up doing, their body's not going to end up in that type of situation?
Well, definitely the first part that I mentioned, mobility, is continuously or regularly grease your joints, so move. People that are sitting all day doing desk job, if you can, every hour, every couple hour, even if not for real, go to the bathroom, and in the bathroom, squat on the bowl, a couple reps, and just moving is very important. And then I guess is the awareness, right? To make sure that your balance is the awareness that if I'm a puncher or a Muay Thai guy, maybe, after class or on my days off, I do a little bit of pulling. So try to have the awareness that what are the type of movements that am I doing? If you're like the guy that picks up the trash and you're always picking up the trash with your right hand, always twisting to the left, maybe you try to get some awareness and twist to the right a couple times and also kind of feel what's going on in my core, in my lower back. There's more tension on the right side versus the left side. So there's definitely a part of being aware of what I'm doing, but also what I'm feeling. like for sure, unless whichever job you're doing, you go home, you drink beer, you smoke weed, you sit back and you just kind of over medicate yourself with pain pills or other substances, then you prevent yourself from feeling what's going on in your body. And your body is constantly talking to you. If you eat crap, you have diarrhea. Your body's talking to you, right? And if you're aware and you're listening to your body, then you have a chance in balancing either the muscles, like you mentioned before, or just balancing your practice in the sense that sometimes it's not so much balancing bicep versus tricep, it's just too much training. Today is day off. Today is massage. Today is the spa. Instead of training, and then plateau, and it's been, I don't know, a year that I can't get 1 pound more on my squat. Maybe you just need a week break, or work differently. That's another completely different topic.
So,
But
yeah. So as a trainer, you've seen obviously a lot of people. I know you've also worked with people who are dealing with pain. You've dealt with injury rehabilitation. So what are some of the biggest issues that you see from a movement perspective? What's missing? What do most people neglect that ends up costing them down the road?
I love that question. I think I was gonna say I didn't know how to fit it, but what I would call mobility training is not only greasing the joint, but then afterwards working three things. And the first one is what's missing. I think people, even trainers, even experienced trainers, forget to train the feet, like foot strength. Because we're in a shoe all day, most two things happen. Most of the time, the shoe is too tight, it's just squishing the toes. So then we don't have mobility in the toes. And then lack of mobility in the toes affects the foot. Lack of mobility in the foot affects the ankle. Lack of mobility, and then goes all the way up. Some people have back pain just because they have bunions. The toe that comes in, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, train your core, get some painkillers." Just no, let your feet be feet instead of, like, I don't know what we call this, but not feet, because you need mobility in the toes to have fully functioning feet. I think that'd be number one. And then number two is training the core properly. Most people, when you think about core, what do? They do sit-ups.
Six
And what
packs.
do we? Yeah,
We got to get the six pack, bro.
yeah, we try. But there's many ways to train the core. But then
No,
if we're
I
doing
know.
sit-up,
That's the problem, right? That's the problem is we're focusing on that one first layer of
yes,
the
and there's
abdominal muscles, but there is
exactly
so much more involved than just those
so
abs.
much. Exactly, just like I said, there's so many layers. So then, just to come back to the sit-up thing, we're doing sit-ups all day to try to get that beautiful six-pack. But then we're already at work in that rounded posture, and I'm reinforcing that with some extra sit-up after work. Doesn't make sense. First of all, your back is part of the core, right? So sometimes doing some back extension could be useful. But then, just like you said, there's so many layers, there's so many ways to train your core that is going to help your functionality. So training feet, training core properly, back, front, side, twisting, everything you can. And then afterwards, neck stability. So feet, core, and neck. And a lot of people don't get that, but if someone is grinding their teeth at night, if someone has a crooked jaw, if someone has, like, their eyes are not leveled, that's all things that's going to mess up your neck and mess up the whole thing downstream. Is if your neck or your head is not properly placed, it's going to create tension in your neck. It's going to mess up your core. You're not going to activate it properly, and you're going to walk funny, and then you create back pain, shoulder pain, whatever it is. So training feet, I think feet is the big one. And I forgot to say there's two things. So there's the feet, but then also the fact that we have big soles, especially the squishy soles, or just a shoe that's so rigid, you know. So now the shoe is doing all the work for you. So then what does the body do if your foot is in a casket or something? It turns off all your stabilizing muscle of the feet, the ankle, maybe even the hip. So then, because the shoe is doing all the work, the body's like, okay, it's doing all the work. I'm going to spend energy elsewhere. All my stabilizing muscle, let's take a break. And then when you remove your foot, and when you change your shoe, twist your ankle, twist your knee, tweak your back. So training feet I would say is probably number one. Core correctly, and then fixing your spine so that your neck is stable, is strong enough or smart enough. It's not only about being strong, but adapting it enough to support your head, because all your brain, your body is going to do a lot to stabilize your head, because that's where your brain is, that's where your eyes is, and your eyes, your ears, your nose, all where the places where you get your senses are in the head. So your body's going to spend a lot of energy to make sure that your head, your number one receptor of where am I in the world, uh, is going to spend a lot of energy to keep that level. So if we don't have a adaptive, smart neck, it's going to be a hard. It's going to be hard to maintain health and postural, balance.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. I want to come back to core for a sec because I have a real life example that I think might help people understand what can happen if you overdo it on the crunches and the ab work. I think in my situation, it was also the fact that I was getting hit a lot. So, I mean, I've mentioned to you, I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on this type of platform, but I went through these past couple of years, I've gone through chronic pelvic pain. So I've become an expert almost in the pelvic floor muscles, which are muscles we just don't talk about. No one talks about the pelvic floor muscles in training. We don't talk about it in the gym. We don't talk about martial arts. We talk about the core, but if there's a part of the core that I think is the most important part, is the pelvic floor muscles. Mm-hmm. These are the stabilizers of our entire body. They are responsible for the way we walk, the way we stand, the way we react to stress, the way that we adapt in our movement. They're very difficult to train. It's not like you can do a lot of exercises to target those muscles. But what is important is that you mitigate and manage the stress that you're placing on the peripheral muscles. And I'm going to give you a really good example that I experienced personally. So I'd been dealing with this chronic pain that came out of nowhere and that I'm still dealing with, but in a much healthier way. And it's become much more manageable. And I was seeing a physiotherapist, and the first thing she mentioned was, okay, you can release your abs now. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you're lying on my table looking to be treated for this, and your abs are tight. I'm like, no, they're not. Mm-hmm. I'm just lying here. I'm not doing anything. She's like, but they are. And luckily for me, she had a biofeedback machine. So she puts these sensors on my abs, and it shows me the amount of tension that I'm carrying in my muscles at rest, lying on a massage table. And my tension level was at a 15. She's like, you're at a 15. I'm like, is that good? She's like, no, you should be at a 1 or a 0 because there's no reason for your abdominal muscles to be active right now. You're lying here. Your muscles are so chronically, there was chronic tension happening at this level subconsciously that my muscles were stuck in a fight or flight response. So I have a 15 level of tension in my abdominals, especially in the lower abdominals, when I should be at a 0. And that just blew my mind. And I just started thinking, like, how does this happen? And then she's like, well, for one, she's like, it happens when people carry a lot of stress, because that's where a lot of stress is stored in the body, is in that region, the lower abdominals, the pelvic floor, the back, the neck, the traps, right? Mm-hmm. People carry all that tension from being up here, but not just from the physical ways that we move, but also from even the mental stress, the mental anxiety that we experience. It gets stored. But what was even more incredible was she's like, okay, I know you meditate. I know you have a really good understanding of breath training. Now I need you to bring your 15 down to a 2. And I need you to do it in the next 2 to 3 minutes. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, close your eyes and breathe and focus on your abdominals and releasing that tension. And I did it. In 2 minutes, I got down to a level 2. And I could feel with every breath, the tension slowly releasing, and I got down from a 15 to a 2 just through breathing. Now, the problem is subconsciously, the next day, I'm going to go back to a 15 because that's my default, right? That's where my body is stuck. So she's like, so every day you're going to need to lie back, close your eyes, and focus on that part of your body and release that tension. But it blew my mind, dude, because subconsciously, my body was stuck in tension mode. And I think it's a combination of how I've dealt with stress most of my life, but also, especially in striking as a coach, every single time I got hit, and I'm not just talking about sparring, I'm talking about holding pads. Every single time someone kicked or punched, my flinching mechanism is activated, right?
Yes.
I go into this protective mode, which is like to basically so that I can receive that hit, I need to be tense. And if I think about the thousands, if not possibly millions of strikes that I've taken over the years of coaching, it's completely possible that my body has just stored so much of that tension that it just forgot how to release it.
Yeah.
And so that's where, when I talk about functional training, it's learning not just how to get strong, but how to get soft, right? Learn how to, and I think that's where practices like yoga or even Tai Chi or Qigong and just breathing. And I think one practice that I've started recently is called Yoga Nidra, which is that form of yoga focused exclusively on relaxation and kind of doing this full body scan and just releasing all of that tension from your body through the breath. And that's the stuff we don't talk about in the gyms. That's the stuff we don't talk about until you're lying on a therapist's table and they're telling you that your body is stuck in fight or flight. And the reason you're waking up in the middle of the night in intense pain is because of that. And that was it was a bit of an awakening for me, obviously, but it's something that I want to talk about more and more because I think that especially in the fitness world, we neglect that part. It's all about go hard, beat your personal records, lift as much weight as you can, beat that. But there's a cost to that. There's a cost to pushing ourselves in that direction exclusively. We need to find that balance. And I know that's something that you understand really well. And so in your opinion, what are ways that people can find that balance in their movement, but also in their life? I know that you practice other things than fitness because I see videos of you jumping into ice water in the middle of the winter, which I would never do. But I think that what I think you're doing is something I call readiness training, which is you're training your body to deal with stress. It seems like an extreme, but what I think you're doing is you're teaching your body how to relax in those extremely stressful situations so that in your everyday life, your body's like, oh, this is so easy. I don't need to be stressed right now. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. I think there's definitely a stress management goal behind jumping in the cold water. For people to understand, they need to differentiate the acute stress versus chronic stress. And acute stress is me jumping in the water for 5 minutes, maybe 10 if I feel super funky that day, but I'm not jumping in the water every day. I'm not jumping in the water multiple times a day. It's an intense stress for a controlled period of time. So then after I got back to regular temperature, my body's like, oh, I feel so much more relaxed, right? Because I've lived that stress. So then my body's compensating with some more relaxing hormones, to compensate the extreme stress before, compared to chronic stress, would maybe correlates a little bit more to your flinching reflex over millions of times, right? So stress for an hour every day, maybe a couple times a day. So living or forcing myself to experience acute stress in a controlled way eventually makes me better at dealing with any type of stress, and
100%. And I wish I'd known these things back in the day, because I think what it is, and I think sauna has a very similar effect where you're overproducing
extreme heat
using extreme heat or extreme cold, where, for example, if I'm, and my job was to get hit, and that sounds stupid when I say it that way, but it's basically I was a human punching bag for like 5 to 6 years of my life. And when I realized but that can also be someone who works on Wall Street, who's dealing with massive amounts of mental stress. I think the effects are extremely similar. I think it takes the same similar toll on the body. And it could be, and it's not to say that we should all live stress-free, because I think stress-free living is pretty boring. and you don't really get a whole lot done. But if that's your choice, so be it. I think it's okay to take on stress. I think it's having those, like you said, you don't do it every day, but when you do it, it's almost like you could take on a whole week of stress, of small little stress moments, and then teach your body with that one intense session of ice bath to let go of everything you accumulated during the week.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I feel like that's kind of, as I started to do more sauna, as I started to do more of this type of stress release in these more intense types of scenarios, I started to realize like, oh, I can take on these small amounts of stress and then find maybe once a week where I do this intense way of releasing it all and kind of bringing my body back to balance so that I can start off again and take on a little bit more, but then always have that built-in practice where I'm able to get that big release so that I can take on the smaller amounts over time. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. And I think that you bring up something that I often talk with a friend of mine. We call it the comfort crisis, in a sense that since the advent of industrial revolution, technology and just civilization has leaped very fast into like heated houses, electricity, cars, and yada yada yada, which made us not have to live as much stress as the people before the industrial revolution, where they had to garden their own food, they had to hunt their own food, and they had to impose some sort of stress demand on their physical body just to stay alive. Compared to now, with not only the industrial revolution but also the technological evolution, the computers, the cell phone, the smartphones, the cars, the electric this, electric that, is doing a lot of the work for us, right? So much that we think that we must seek comfort at all cost, which I somewhat disagree, in a sense that whether it's by jumping in the cold water or going to jiu-jitsu class and fighting people, we need to put ourselves under a minimal amount of stress, because there's a saying in the fitness world, or in even kinesiology. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Use it or lose it. If I never use my bicep, they'll melt. If I never use my glutes, and I see it, having worked with people that are injured, been talking to people that are like, yeah, I sit 14 hours a day for the past 10 years. And when I look and I assess their muscle density and muscle abilities, they have no glute, or they have unresponsive glutes. And because they have unresponsive glutes, they have back pain, right? Because the glutes stabilize the hips. And if your hips is not in the right position, then you create pain because there's pressure on your disc and yada, yada, yada. So we need a minimal amount of stress, whether for the muscle or even for the mind. If you're not ever in a situation where you need to count on top of your head and you're always using your calculator, at a certain moment, I'll be telling you like 10 plus 2, and you're going to be like, you're not going to know, you know? But if you're constantly like, working with cash and counting how much you owe somebody after a transaction, your brain stays sharp, The same with the muscle. And almost I would say the same with the heart. And that brings me to something very touchy, and I'm sort of glad that I jumped on that. But people right now have to be careful, because we've been in the pandemic, we've been through lockdowns, we've been all isolated, we've been not connecting with humans the same way we did before 2 years ago. So now I see friends or friends of friends that are socially awkward, which is fine, but you have to force yourself a little bit to put yourself in a stressful, emotional situation to go back to a social circle and talk to someone that you're scared to talk, and say hello to that beautiful girl at work that you haven't seen in 2 years because you've been working from home, or talk to your boss face to face because eventually you want a promotion, and not stay in your cubicle or at home on Zoom forever, because whether it's stress or call it whatever you want, but for the heart or for your emotional body, we need to put ourselves in a social context and deal with the awkwardness of, I'm not sure what this guy or this girl thinks of me, but then still be and still connect, because I don't know anybody that could survive alone. I do not.
Yeah, I think loneliness is a pandemic of its own right now.
100%.
because so many people were forced into it. And I think there are people that are already kind of leaning in that direction who would prefer to be alone. They think they prefer to be alone, but then when they're forced to, they realize like, oh, maybe going to work every day wasn't so bad because I didn't like those people that much, but at least I got to see some people. And I'm laughing, but it's not funny. And I think what you're saying is so true. And I think that emotion, even if we're talking about the body, like what I've learned over the past few years, the relationship between the body and the mind and our emotional selves is so strong. You know, like the way that the body just stores all of your pain and all of your trauma and all of the things that you've gone through in your life. And if you never deal with those things, even loneliness, you know, depression, they all have a physical cost at some point. But the same way that if you don't take care of your body, it's going to manipulate your neurochemistry into a negative direction, which is going to emphasize any mental health issues you might already have. And so there's this relationship between the body and mind that I think even now we still don't fully understand, and we're starting to have a better understanding of. And I came up with this idea the other day, which was to train the body to heal the mind and to train the mind to heal the body. And this idea that obviously if I break my arm, I go to the doctor, I get a cast, 4 to 6 weeks later, I'm good to go. That's pretty straightforward. But that said, I know, especially through my past few years, I've connected with people that have been dealing with chronic pain for a big part of their lives, and they've exhausted every physical strategy. They've done every stretch, they've taken every medication, they've seen every specialist, and they get to a point where they give up because they're like, I've tried everything. Okay, well, have you tried stress management? Have you tried meditation? Have you tried connecting to that pain through the breath? And I'm not saying that as someone who fully understands it, but as someone who's explored it and gotten pretty amazing results from it. And so I'm training my mind to heal my body. And in the same way, I also know that if I'm having a panic attack, if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling anxious, the best way for me to deal with that is to move my body, is to go work out, is to go for a run, or even just a hike or a walk in nature, where instead of sitting around and trying to think my way out of a thinking problem, I totally flip it and be like, all right, I know sitting here is not going to help, so I'm out. I'll just go for a run, or I'll go walk my dog, or I'll go work out. And that has a really positive effect. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. And I'd love to know your thoughts on just everything we've talked about, like kind of close it up for us in a way that could inspire someone who's struggling right now, whether they're struggling mentally because of whatever's going on in their lives, they're struggling physically because they're dealing with pain and they're having a really hard time managing it. What are some ways that you would motivate or inspire someone to just find a way to get some balance into their lives?
Just to take a quick step back, it's going to make
of course,
a lot of sense quick.
No worries, man.
Quickly.
Take a big step back if you want. Yeah.
You talked about the pelvic floor.
Yes.
Right? The pelvic floor is the muscle that are like inside your hips.
There's so many little muscles there, bro. It's not even funny.
And on the opposite end, at the bottom of your rib cage, you have the diaphragm. And whatever we call the deep core, because I would add a bunch of layers on top, is anything in between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. So what could I tell people to do to help them get their power back? Breathe.
Yeah.
Intentional breathing. And I'm not even saying meditation, which I still think is as valuable or maybe a bit more, but just breathe intentionally. Just see or try to feel or try to go inside. And am I able to take a full deep breath? Am I able to inhale as much air as my lungs are able to hold? And then am I able to get it out slowly? Because what happens for most people that have pain, emotional pains, they're able to breathe in. But then for some reason, they can't get it out. They can't release just to come back to the fact that you talked about before, relax. A lot of gyms or a lot of physical place, they don't talk about relaxation. They just talk about flexing, getting strong, and pumping the iron. But relaxing or exhaling or letting go is 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 kind of a metaphor, but essentially, are you able to breathe in fully and then exhale slowly and fully as well? And practice that with as little judgment as possible. Just breathe in, breathe out, set a timer, a minute the first time, 5 eventually. And afterwards, there's like almost no limit. I don't really know anybody that meditates for more than an hour a day. But if you get to an hour a day, I'm pretty sure a lot of your physical, mental, and emotional problem will kind of melt. So if you're able to breathe deep, exhale slow, I think we're on the path.
Yeah, and that's the bridge, right? I feel like the body-mind bridge is the breath. Whether you're looking to heal physically or heal mentally, the breath is probably the most powerful tool we have that allows us to focus on both things and stop thinking of those two things as separate. You know, we separate body and mind in so many different ways, and at the end of the day, it's all part of one experience.
Yes.
It's all connected, and especially if we start talking about at the energetic level, it goes beyond that. You know, we're talking about frequencies and energies, and there's just so much there that we don't see, but that is absolutely at work. And I love that you talked about the diaphragm and the ability to breathe. And what I've noticed over my own training through breath training, but also other people, is they find themselves just through a simple breathing practice. And I like that you mentioned not meditation, because I do think that's a separate kind of way. It's a different approach to breathing that involves certain mental practices, but just the physical act of expanding your rib cage, expanding the space, the abdominal space, to give room to the diaphragm to be able to stretch properly. Where I think a lot of people use that first maybe top half of their lungs and never even explore that bottom part of the lungs because their breathing is so shallow. And once you force that breath to go deeper into the lungs, it's pretty amazing what can happen, especially physically. You know, I have athletes that I've worked with that couldn't understand why just through breathing, they improved their endurance. They improved their physical load capabilities just through the act of breathing, which makes sense. Your muscles are getting more oxygen. Your breathing system is more efficient. But we think it has to be complicated to work. But something as simple as just forcing those breaths to go deep into your abdominal space can have such a powerful effect on the body and the mind. So thank you for finishing with that. I think it's such a beautiful place to close this conversation. And so, Max, my friend, my brother, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. This will be one of a few conversations I'm sure we're going to have over the next few years. Sir. And thanks again for doing this, brother. I love you, man.
Cool. Namaste. Me too, bro. Much love.